mean when we talk about the in-between, the nexus of our lives, of our reality. So often when we look back at our lives, we look at the milestone moments, these plateaus and footprints that we leave behind as markers of our life's journey. That only makes up about 20 to 30%. The rest is defined and connected by the in-between. Everything that takes place in between. And this is where the art of the spiritual warrior comes in. We can develop the tools and the means to identify all these different elements in our world and become the alchemists of our lives, peering through the nexus and the prism of our multiverse and drawing forth all that we are into the present now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wolf's Den. Pleasure to be back. I want to thank Tanya and Norma Jean for inviting me into this space once again and allowing me to host this space for everyone. That's what the Wolf's Den was created to be, was a hub to include all things, all members of the tribe, all subjects, all acts and walks of life as the true alchemists of our lives, knowing that it's never just one piece that makes us up. It's never just one step of our journey. It's never just one epiphany that we get to identify with and just say, oh, I guess we're done. I guess that's it. There's one lesson I learned very, very early on in training through martial arts was, as soon as you think you got it, you don't got it. You don't got it. And that's okay, because that challenge of self, that awareness of self, it's so important. It's an integration opportunity for understanding the power that we get with ego and knowing that the element of ego in our lives doesn't necessarily have to be a negative connotation. And I think that's a great way to start this show off tonight. Let's talk about some of the elements in our world that create this in-between connection that we get to create our reality, our existence with. One of the first and primordial elements of any existence is you. You. Isn't that an interesting thing? We understand that, but how much do we really think and comprehend about the notion that without me, everything that exists in my world no longer exists? My whole perception, everything that I add, everything that I receive, the entire alchemy of my existence, without my consciousness, without me present, no longer is a whole. Doesn't that really mean that we are the source of our entire existence? Because without us, nothing else matters. Nothing else exists for us in our world. Now, does this mean that we don't have a shared existence, a shared plane of existence? Absolutely not. We're here to be in a shared existence, a shared plane. But that shared plane of existence is filled and inhabited with a whole bunch of individual souls, individual expressions of source, of creation. And we're meant to experience in all different variants of ways to add back to that whole of creation. So knowing that extension of you is the entire source of what you're taking in your existence, that power is one of the greatest elements to understand and comprehend for oneself. The duality that comes with understanding you, the different layers of that, knowing that even as a man and having a powerful present masculine that I choose to establish, that took me a long time in my life to learn how to establish with a safety and security and provision towards it, didn't mean that I don't have a balance of femininity as well. Knowing that nurturing, that gentleness, that vulnerability is a key to unlocking and enhancing higher forms of that masculinity. All these different elements coming into a push and pull in our world, and an intricacy, a flow. It's very, very powerful to understand the makeup of our characteristics of self. And going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago here, the ego being another very, very interesting element in our world, I feel has been misunderstood. I don't know if I want to say conditioned, but it's certainly, I feel, been misunderstood. When I've had experiences growing up and through the early stages of my awakening, my activation is probably a great way to put it. I would wrestle with ego. I would wrestle with the concept of what ego meant, what role it played in my world. And for the most part, I was under the impression that it was meant to be rejected, that it was this whole of all the negative parts of myself that I didn't want to show to the world, that was all inhabited by my shadow. And then I had to stop and realize through the process of acceptance, through the process of really getting in touch with all that creation has to offer, the whole of creation, rejection doesn't really come into play on that. At the same time, I can't reject rejection because that's a contradiction. So, without going too deep into a rabbit hole paradox here, let's just get back to how I was looking at ego in my world, because rejection didn't seem like the proper route to take when it came to addressing my ego. It seemed like the ego was such a prominent part of self, whether people were studying spirituality and metaphysics or not. Ego was constantly talked about in an everyday society terminology, and it was always understood that there was an energy that came with the presence of ego. So knowing that it had this presence, regardless of if you're doing spiritual work and metaphysical work, I wanted to know what its relation to the entire being was. And I started by looking at the fact that our initial reaction in teaching is to reject and to shun the ego. So I had to do some deep work, and I had to go through these, I had to go through the memory banks, got to go back, sift through the files and go, oh yeah, this moment where, maybe my ego took control. Maybe my ego was taking charge, taking the lead there, and I didn't really have a hand on the steering wheel anymore. I just said, "No, you got this. I'll take a back seat." Maybe other times where my ego took a hit, where I was so confident or bolstered within an expectation of an outcome that didn't happen. I got really resentful, and I held on to that resent. All of these different files that we keep in the memory banks. And as I'm addressing all of these, there was a commonality and a pattern that I started to notice eventually, where when it came to those big moments where I needed courage, I needed motivation, I needed passion, I needed drive, I needed that boost. I needed to be more than bare minimum, is probably a great way to put it, because we got very comfortable with bare minimum in our society. Um, when I needed more than that, I noticed that's when ego would come in. Okay, so ego isn't necessarily in that instance a shadow. It's more like another part of myself that I use to enhance, to empower, to give me that extra motivation to say, I'm going to accomplish this and nothing's going to stop me. Or I'm going to be okay. No matter what happened to me, I'm going to be okay. To me, all of that is a healthy ego integration. What I was noticing a pattern of recollection, or how I had integrated ego into my world, was wounded. It was a wounded ego setting. So knowing that all those instances in my past where I needed that boost, I needed that extra surge of self, and I called on ego, and ego was wounded, ego was met with ego was met with rejection and judgment. It wasn't ever respected. It wasn't ever given a sense of awareness to say, yes, I respect you in your power. I respect you as a part of myself, as a part of trying to empower myself and work in tandem, work with my ego. It was always shunned, even when it surfaced. So when it did surface, it had to boast its own power. It had to boast its own presence, because I wasn't doing it for it. I wasn't supporting it in the way that ego was just naturally trying to support me. Meaning I myself, not just the circumstances, but I myself was wounding my own ego. All of that revelation came into play, and I said, wow, I got some work to do with myself here. I got some addressing I need to do. And I had to sit down with my ego. I had to talk with my ego, and I had to say, hey, what's going on? And the most common way that I found to be able to really tap into that was early on in those moments where you find yourself, maybe judging something or having a shadow creep up, and a defense mechanism comes into play, or a coping mechanism, any of that. That's usually driven by a wounded ego. So in those moments, first thing I would do is I would address my ego, and I would say, "Oh, I acknowledge your presence and I respect your power. I love you." And I would say this out loud to myself, and I would say, "Hi, ego. I acknowledge your presence. I respect your power, and I love you." And I remember the first few times I did that internally, that voice, just, I don't know if I can swear on this channel yet. I haven't been given that permission, but it was pretty vulgar. Some of the stuff that ego had to say to me at that point, rightfully so. Rightfully so. I had spent my entire life up to that point treating it like garbage, giving it no acknowledgement, giving it no sense of presence, of priority, of acceptance. So by the time I did, and I'm trying to do it, all lovey-dovey, "Oh, it's okay. I love you. I accept you," not even taking accountability for any of that in the past. Ooh, it had some things to say. It had some things to say. So I kept doing that for a long time. How long, I can't remember, because this was quite a while ago. I want to say it was a minimum of at least a month or two, doing that consistently, going to work, going out in the world, just having these interactions and waiting to see what triggered me, what arose as far as that wounded ego, and catching it. And eventually, over time, the response got a lot lighter. The response got a lot more, "Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for acknowledging me." It got more integrated, and I realized that that wall started to come down, and I could call on my ego in the moments where I really did just need that boost. I need that extra confidence. I need that surge of motivation. I need that drive forward to make it through an impassable obstacle without that extra surge of feeling, those moments that we go through that calibrate our character, calibrate our strength, how much we're willing to call upon ourselves. And to me, doing the healing work of being able to tap into that power of ego in such a healthy way was really a acknowledgement to the shadow, acknowledgement to the duality of shadow, knowing that the brighter our light shines, the more shadow is going to inevitably be cast. Now, this is an interesting topic to get into, because does that mean that we're all casting shadow when we illuminate our light? No, but it means that it exists. The brighter a light shines, the deeper the shadows that surround it, feeding off of each other. One contrast is enhancing the other. So understanding that, when we get to those points in our world where we're surrounded by shadow, circumstances, environment, people going through things, us going through things, changes, the inevitable shadow of duality. Do we succumb to it? Do we allow it to simply overtake us? I personally use it to enhance my shadow, to enhance my light. My apologies. The deeper that shadow gets around me, I use it as that opportunity to say, well, how bright can I actually shine right now? Because a candle never shines brighter than when it is engulfed by shadow. You don't shine a flashlight into a well-lit room. And when we think about those concepts, when we understand that contrast, we can really start to look at the quantum of our world, and knowing that these layers upon layers of different elements, different appendices, I want to say, because we tend to look at things in such a linear format when we're conditioned, or when we're growing out of conditioning. And it's a very awakening process to allow the quantum layers into our world, and it starts with, really, in my opinion, doing that shadow work, because that duality, and understanding the duality and the inevitability of that duality, how it's literally foundational piece of this dimension. It allows so much more acceptance in our world, and less judgment. Judgment is a it's a very hard piece to release, knowing that so often when we're doing those castings of judgment, it's a deflection. It's a projection and a deflection. We're either avoiding looking inward on something, or we're deflecting away to have attention brought somewhere that we're just not ready to have it be brought to. And these are all points of self-awareness that come through doing, I want to say, not just shadow work, but honestly, really just growing up. I kind of just want to use the term growing up, because there's a level of um, untruth. I don't even want to use the term dishonesty. I want to say untruth. Somebody had used that with me recently, and it resonates in this particular moment, because in the way that we receive it, it's not necessarily true to the alchemy of us, but it wasn't particularly deception when it was expressed to us, if that makes sense. When someone's truth is their truth, their individual truth, there's power in that for them, but it may not necessarily resonate as truth with us. It may just be information at that point, which is perfectly fine. Just means that it's an untruth to you. It's not a lie, it's not deception, it's not wrong. It's just kind of an untruth for us in particular. And knowing that there have been untruths when it comes to how we look at uncovering ourselves, I look at it as growing up, because we're stepping out of that adolescent mentality. I don't want to say child, I want to say adolescent. I'm going to be very particular about it, because the way that I look at adolescence is there is a dependency factor still on a generation before, or on caregivers, the elders of the community, however we want to terminize that, or use terminology towards that. That dependency is linked to the generation before. But there is also a naivete and a unwarranted confidence that comes all through adolescence, which gives that confidence, gives the adolescent that opportunity to go take those risks, and actually learn something about learn how the world works, learn about consequences, learn about sacrifice. So I'm not saying any of these things are invalid. I'm saying that adolescence is different than growing up into adulthood, and it's different than childhood. And I feel so much of society is meant to keep us in a bit of an adolescent mind state, where we're dependent on something beyond ourselves, yet at the same time we're convinced that we have the ability to do these things that we haven't been given knowledge on. There's knowledge that have been withheld. There's experiences and conditioned information that keeps us within a very linear format. But that linearity and some of that conditioning that comes with that tries to convince us that, oh no, you're capable of it, but we haven't been given the tools to do it. All of this falls under the moniker of adolescence. And I feel when I talk about growing up, we're growing out of that. We're growing out of that dependency. We're not looking at the way we're told things anymore, and the way that we're supposed to do it. We're doing things on how it's meant for us. And that means, shaking the bridge up a little bit, getting on some unsolid ground, and finding your balance, finding your footing, knowing what strength it truly takes to get up to the top of the hill, and then how much fun you're going to have when you roll back down. It's a whimsy, I want to say, that comes with an understanding of the mastery. And there was a bit of a tale that was told once. I can't remember exactly where I heard it, so I can't source it properly, and I apologize for it. But the story goes, a Buddhist monk once told somebody that the journey of enlightenment is very much so the same as spending your entire life looking for your keys so you can leave and get to a destination, only to realize on your deathbed They were in your pocket the whole time. I remember the very first time I heard that, I couldn't help but smile. I couldn't help but laugh. And there was a master teacher that said, when you laugh in response to either an epiphany, a shadow moment, any type of new awareness, new sense of awareness that you're stepping into. That laughter is the release of that adolescence, of that student mentality where we're dependent on something. And it's an acknowledgement of the master within yourself. We're simply just going with the flow and understanding that that flow and momentum is a never ending ebb, a give and take. It's not something that can be manipulated or controlled. It's simply something that we partake in. And all we can do is partake. That's where that laughter comes in. It's an acknowledgement of that participation in what's already happening all across the multiverse and within the quantum. Because the quantum is infinite. The quantum exists in its entirety, past, present, future, what if scenarios. It just doesn't matter how we want to try to quantify it. It already exists that way because the quantum is everything. The quantum is every single potentiality that can exist in existence. And then from the quantum, it expands and it extends out into expressions of creation. And I've gone through a discussion about this with a number of people in different contexts about trying to make the right choices in our world. And I don't want to upset things. I don't want to live up to my I don't want to not live up to my purpose. And and I really try to boil it down in the essence of, if you're being as authentically you as you possibly can be, no matter what that entails, as long as it's just authentically you, you're doing exactly what you need to do here. And it really is that simple, because the meaning of life is just to live. It's just to live. And if we try to get wrapped up in all the nuances and the details of impermanence, we're going to drive ourselves crazy, because we can never make sense out of something that is impermanent. We can't build a foundation out of something that is built off of impermanence. And everything within the material dimension is impermanent because it's meant as a bit of a way station. And within the quantum, when we talk about the dimensional ladder, and I kind of look at it, the timelines and the dimensions, as an accordion almost, right? And a lot of people have expressed it through branches and ladders and all these different creative metaphors. But for me, I've always kind of looked at it as an accordion, where it started here. It started always kind of one, and as creation and expression learned how to layer itself, learned how to duplicate and multiply and branch out in variation, it just kept expanding, kept expanding, kept expanding. But eventually, as with anything, that stretch has to come back in, because a give and take, it's an ebb and flow. If something goes down a wavelength, even wavelengths that don't adhere to what we consider the science of gravity, or anything that could weigh something down, wavelengths go up and down. They have a pattern to them. Everything has a pattern to it. So as all the dimensions and all the timelines expanded out, eventually they got to start coming back in. And that's what's happening in this timeline, I feel, right now at this particular point, is we're all starting to come back in together into that one source dimension. Now, knowing that everything starts at that and it goes out and it comes back in, again, this is all based off of our reality. So does that mean that all the dimensions are collapsing and nothing else is going to exist? No, that's not what I'm referring to. I mean our inner dimensions, the way that we are receiving our expression of creation. That's what's coming back into one. That's what's coming back into one. We've been so expanded through all of our parallel selves in the multiverse, through so many different generations, reincarnations, all these different lifetimes. since the last time that we had access to this knowledge. But we have a different capacity now as we're developing the knowledge because we went through generations of experience. We leveled up. And now we get to use that knowledge as it's resurfacing in a very different way, which is why it's coming back together. Because we're able to utilize the energy and these teachings and these ancient wisdoms in a way that we couldn't before, in a way that our ancestors were equipped to do, but didn't have the capacity to sustain. So now we're at the point of reclaiming that ancient knowledge because we're capable now of so much more. And now we get to equip ourselves to utilize that capacity in a whole new way. So, as all of it's coming back together, our dimensional presence is going to shift. And I know on one of the shows this week that Norma and Tanya had, they were talking about this. Where Norma said, if I'm gone the next day, you know where I went, and there's a lot of truth to that. From my understanding on it, the third dimension is the material world to take things from concept to material to something more, something higher than material. Now, everything has to start from that source, that quantum, right? So when it first gets expressed, does it immediately come out as a material object? No, nothing comes out as a whole when it's first conceived of. It has to start in an, let's call it an incubation process. And that's where I look at the dimensions 1 and 2, where everything goes from dimension 1, where it's just a concept. It's just conceptual. It's an expression, it's an idea. It doesn't really have a form. Its form is ambiguous, but it can take the form of anything. It's dependent on that step 2. That step 2 is the formation of that conception. Now we're going to put some shape to this. We're going to put some direction to it. But again, it's only 2-dimensional. It's linear. It doesn't have a life to it quite yet. That's where third dimension comes in, where that interpretation and that formation of what was conceptualized now takes shape, now takes life. It takes a form of its own beyond the concept, because the concept and how it was formed was all influenced by something. But once it takes on a life of its own, now we have that, again, that understanding of duality, alchemy in our worlds, all these different pushes and pulls that are going to take us in a million different directions. We get a different flavor of experience. We're not being solely influenced by an intention or a concept anymore. We take on an entirely new branch of existence. And that's what I see third dimension as. And it falls in line with a lot of star knowledge and Star Nation teachings, within why certain races and certain beings materialize and come here in the first place, because there is a physicality to the experience in the material third dimension that you don't get in any of the other dimensions. It doesn't exist there. This is a very unique dimension within that concept. It's told that Sasquatch come here to breed, and I haven't witnessed this, and I don't know if I quite want to, but it's spoken about that. They come through from fourth dimension, and that crystalline DNA energy within the realm that they reside in, when it materializes and takes shape as a physical form, that's the reason that they're covered in hair, because hair is crystal. Hair is crystalline, taking shape in essence. So it makes a lot of sense coming from that energetic realm, why they take that form, why they take that shape in that format. Sounds and vowels are very important to them because they hold a very universal tonality to them. There are, um, I don't want to misspeak, but there's a science to the vowels in particular, and they create energy vortexes within the actual sound and the vibrations and the frequency that are produced. It's why we use them in chants and we use them in mantras so often as well. And you'll notice if you ever hear, like actually hear a Sasquatch, it's a lot of vowels, a lot of very very grunty vowels. Um, and the one time that I heard them communicating in a forest when I was out on a retreat, it was the very first time that I met Tanya, actually. I was out of Vedette Lake. And my mentor, David Pills, and I, actually my peer now, my good friend, David Pills, and I, we woke up early before ceremony, and we could hear this sound coming out of the forest. I was up a little bit earlier than him, and I turned to him and I said, am I just hearing that, or are you hearing that too? He goes, oh, no, 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 that's Sasquatch. I go, okay. And the only way I can describe it was, it's like, if anybody's seen those videos of those screaming goats, it had a very similar um cadence to that, where it was kind of just like a blah, but it was like a rhythm to it. It was almost like a melodic screaming goat. That's how I expressed it. And I had people actually go, I've never heard it expressed that way before. So it's interesting if you ever hear that in the forest. It may not be somebody caught in a bear trap. It may just be a couple Sasquatches speaking to each other. Um, but again, they come here to experience that material. They come here to experience that physicality, that duality. And it's one of the reasons I feel like when we go through these higher points of activation and energetic integration, you lose that sense of physicality. You start to integrate more into these higher dimensions, and you lose that. Oh, yes, it's just a vessel. It's just a vessel, because again, it's a way station. It's just one step of so much more. Not to say that it doesn't have value, but in my opinion, all the value is contained within this dimension, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Knowing that, being that good person, being that moral alignment with yourself, whether it's shadow or light, just be authentic. It adds to the third dimension, the entirety, the whole of what we do here. I just personally don't subscribe to the fact that it affects anything beyond. I think everything that already does exist in the beyond, it does, because that's where we come from. That's where the source of everything that we are comes from. And I think here we're just given a lot of opportunities to make a lot of potential variant decisions. And that's that's kind of the point. You're not supposed to know the right decision. You're supposed to make the authentic decision. That's how I found my peace. That's how I really, really found my peace with this. Um, Talking a little bit more about dimensional crossing over, even, because that's a big element to play that we do without even knowing. How often do we wake up first thing in the morning and we're not anchoring into a present state of consciousness? We're immediately going to the memory banks, some familiar memory space, whether it's a painful memory or not. It's a familiar space. We're going back and we're revisiting these dimensions that in true essence no longer exist in the physical now. They exist in the ether. They exist in the quantum. Everything exists in the quantum already. So the fact that we get lost of putting that energy into that, we lose all of that presence in the now, because we're playing in the quantum, we're playing in the ether without even knowing it. We're instinctively kind of conditioned to run through these things, especially when we hit, I want to say depressive cycles, or times of feeling depressed. There has been not just, I don't just want to put it on social media, because movies were doing this for the longest time. There's been a bit of a glamorization and a bit of a um monopolization toward of romanticizing of being in a depressive state, where we were trained that when we feel sad, no, 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 you don't feel sad, you are sad. You identify, you become that. You are sad, you are angry, you are depressed. And our entire being now identifies with that frequency. not allowing anything else in, and now starting an echo chamber and a closed circuit of I am this. Universe responds to that. Universe responds to I am statements because you're showing up and you're saying, this is who I am. Please feed me this. And the universe goes, oh, okay. What the, it's that simple. When we try to convince ourselves, oh, everything's happening. I'm doing all the right things. I'm being such a good person without being honest enough and vulnerable enough, nurturing enough with ourselves, gentle to say, you know what, maybe I'm not being as honest with myself as I could be. Maybe I'm not showing up in my world and I'm projecting a load of expectations without taking any accountability for the fact that I'm the one that formats it. I'm the one that sets up how to receive any external reception, influence, any of that. I set that up first. I'm the one that's going to create a foundation of how to express and how to create an exchange of that in my world with my presence, my services, my how I choose to show up. That takes accountability and it takes a lot of vulnerability. That's so often again that romanticizing of creating this closed circuit of depressiveness of identifying with it, it doesn't allow the room for. Because when we're in that closed circuit, we're then just feeding ourselves things to be sad. Have you ever got to that point where you were like crying, like really obnoxiously, like hardcore crying, and instead of just letting it go, like having a real good cry and just releasing it, you start to calm down. And then you think about something that makes you sad again. And you actually pick it up and you force yourself to continue crying hard like that. Why? That's a choice. That is a choice that we're making. And again, it takes a certain level of vulnerability to really be honest with yourself. I kind of laugh at myself when I get to those points now because it's really important on a number of different factors to have that awareness when we're just caught up in something. We're human, we're allowed to be caught up in things, and b to not take things so seriously, to know that even the pain, even the sadness, even the anger, all of it is just meant to be felt, released, and expressed. So taking the joy in that, or looking for the joy in even those shadow experiences in life, actually allows me to carry much more of a light through those dark tunnels. It enhances my light. It allows me to accept things for exactly what they are as the whole of creation. And there's a profundity that comes with that, where I don't have to look at the negative things and judge them and put all my energy into that anymore. No, 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 no. The expectations, the memory banks, the things like that, these are things that I visit. But as soon as I catch myself doing it, recall that presence and I say, what am I doing right now? And there's a trick to this. I personally do it in a very interesting way because I'm a bit of a performer, but I like to actually just narrate what I'm doing because it's kind of fun. And in the moment, when you focus and say, what I'm doing right now is I'm sitting on camera having an incredible stream call with all you wonderful people that chose to sit here and listen to me today. While I'm speaking about duality and different elements of our world. There's just notice the focus that comes in. There's a laser focus that comes in with that because I'm literally putting my energy into what am I doing right now? Narrating that process just allows me this to not waver, to not, go all over the place. It just stays right here, stays right where I need it to be, focused in that intent of what I'm doing, because that intent is that key that unlocks the energy in motion. And narrating is fun. It's just fun to do. So I found when I did that, not only would it bring in the focus, but it gave me a tool to use when my mind would start to wander. So again, when I would get caught in the narration, eventually you're going to hit a point where you feel like you're just babbling and like you're not really even just making sense. The words don't hold meaning anymore. And when that happens, your energy isn't present because the connection, is severed somewhere. It just, these things happen. You got to live your life through the day. and your mind will start to wander. When I'm narrating and I catch my mind start to wander, you know what the first thing I do is I narrate the fact that my mind's starting to wander. I go, right now I noticed that as I was in the midst of narrating my daily adventure, my mind is starting to wander to this memory in particular, back in the 6th grade when it was play day at school and everyone wanted to dress up as kitty cats, but I said no, I'm being the canine today. And it's one of those things where understanding that narrating the fact that my mind was wandering still allowed me to be present. And it allowed me to reclaim that I acknowledge that my mind is going here, but I'm choosing to pull back. I'm not rejecting that memory. I'm not suppressing anything. I'm simply saying I'm choosing to recall back into the now. Memories are an interesting, they're a very, very interesting element in our world. Memories hold so much power for us, don't they? What is a memory, though? Because so much of science and human study, if we want to go down this route first, has shown us that memory isn't so accurate. It's kind of bias at the end of the day. It's really based off of that personal truth that we carry. And that's okay. Um, that personal truth holds value because, again, without you, your existence, your world as it exists, isn't present. So that truth helps you build that. It helps us build our sense of what reality means to us. An understanding and an awareness of that lets us express it. But the way that we hold memories to such a standard of identification in our world, especially when it comes to memories that involve trauma, isn't that a tricky one? Those ones, those ones are the ones that we use to say, "Oh, without this, I wouldn't be who I am today." So if we took that away, is it to say that you're not you anymore? Or are we just speaking about the alchemy of how we've chosen to identify that energy in motion? Because again, emotions are energies in motion. And when it comes to those traumas and those memories that we store back, there's a lot of energy in motion that is identified with those spaces and is contained in those spaces. Cindy likes to narrate with a Southern country accent. Way to go, Cindy. Um, the energy and motion that comes when we identify those spaces is usually the points, honestly, that we can derive the most power from. Those trauma spaces, when we needed to survive, when we needed to step outside of what was taking place. I can't think of much more of a harness on creating one's reality than actually altering it. It's very, very impressive to think of the survival mechanisms that step in when we have to go through trauma. Now, notice how I'm saying go through and experience trauma rather than saying when we were traumatized, because that's an identifier. When we start using terminology such as I was traumatized, we're choosing to not let go. We're choosing to keep that energy in motion, that emotion that's attached to that space locked up, and it's not flowing, it's blocked. So every time that we go back to enter that space or it comes back into our field because of a similar experience, it's an overwhelming presence of a whole lot of backed up energy that has not been allowed to be released. So when we look at our memories, understanding that how we format them is based off of our truth, it's based off of our presence, our experience. There's a lot of science that goes into the neurons that activate in our brain and the receptors that activate in our brain when we're going into a state of memory are almost identical to the same ones that we have when we dream. Think about that. We're going into a very similar space and state of activation for stepping into memories as we do for dreaming. Okay, so when I look at it from that perspective, are memories just dreams? Are these the experiences that we had in the given moment of now at a specific time that I'm constantly dreaming about? As my now has elevated and moved through the dimensional timeline frequency into a different state of now. The now, not then now. It almost sounds like Spaceball, doesn't it? God, I love that movie. But it relates to it. It's what we're talking about for the now, not the then now, the now. So our memories just dreams of a past presence of now. And if that's the case, can't I lucid dream those memories? Can't I change the context of it? This is a game changer on so many levels because it allows us to go back into these experiences to address all that pent up energy and motion and have a whole new state of presence, a whole new state of orchestrating our reality when we enter those spaces. And it was an interesting place to cover because I had to argue with myself. Well, am I lying to myself? These experiences really happened to me. It was all that wounded ego identification to say, I'm not saying they didn't happen. I'm changing the way it affects me. I'm changing the way that I revisit these spaces. There is no invalidation that's taking place. As a matter of fact, it's empowerment to the moments that I didn't have power. There's not too much else that you can really ask for out of stepping into the quantum like that. So I invite all of you to look at your states of memory when you go back there. The state of dreaming about a past presence of now. Understanding that the now is different than the past now. You've elevated through innumerable, infinite amounts of timeline dimensions to get to the now. Step back into the then with the presence of now. It's very different. It'll be very, very different. This is actually a program that I've started to run, and there are meditations and there are techniques that I walk people through. I call it cognitive memory reprogramming, and it's really just a simple step or simple phases of steps that include acknowledging the fact that we really get to tell our own story however we want to tell it, and it's not lying, it's not invalidation. It's understanding I get to create that because it was my experience, and without me it didn't exist. So it's a very powerful tool, very powerful tool. We're getting to the last little bit here, so I don't know if we have too many questions or comments in the background. I know I did see a question come up here. Oh, we got one here. So, as we ascend in our journey, is there a barometer so as to speak as to understand what level we have ascended to, i.e., 3D, 4D, 5D? Interesting question. Um, I would say, from my own personal experiences, when I hit certain elevations, there was just no question anymore. I equate it very similarly to when we ask ourselves, or we have to ask somebody else, do you think I'm ready for this? And that uncertainty is an indicator that we may be reaching, we may be not just accepting of where we are presently, because that acceptance is actually the key to the elevation to these other plateaus. The power that is held within the higher dimensions in a physical rendition would be considered superpowers. It's incredibly Delicate. It's a very delicate process to integrate into oneself, which is why there has to be a certain level of acceptance. So I would say the barometer is you. The barometer is your own level of self-awareness of that vulnerability that you're showing with yourself and that nurturing that you're showing with yourself to be okay exactly in the state that you're in, because I promise you there isn't a master out there or a high elevated consciousness out there that is seeking to attain anything outside of themselves. So use yourself as that barometer. Use your state of self to really let you know when. And if you feel like you're having to convince yourself or other people of it, that's take it take a deep breath and just it's okay. Breath is life, breath is acceptance, breath is the link and the key to everything. Everything started with breath and sound. So yes, that's my answer is use your own internal compass. Your I would say your perception of things is going to change drastically when you elevate. And it's a it's a nuanced concept because everybody is going to have their own, different interpretation of perception. That's the only way to put it. But you'll just notice that how you're looking at things is not the same as it used to be a month ago, a week ago, a day ago. It goes really, really fast when you just start elevating. You don't have a linearity to things anymore, much like we've been talking about in the call today. It's all about understanding the layers and the quantumality of everything, the potentiality of the quantum, and that allows the perception to expand outward. That's how I personally know I'm elevating at a very quick pace when I don't have to identify with a concept anymore to just allow it to be accepted and in my world, knowing that information is powerful, being present all around me in a shared plane of existence, whether or not it falls into alignment with my truth, with my perception. I also teach and I talk about the distinctions between perception and perspective. For example, perception is what we've been talking about a lot in the show. Our personal truth. Perception is how we receive the world and how we see it through our lenses, how it relates to us uniquely as individuals. There's a lot of power and value in that. Perspective is more so how things relate to the world in a concept of expression. And what I mean by that is there's a shared reality. We live in a shared reality of the third dimension. There are things about the third dimension reality plane that, as an entity in and of itself, exist. And those widespread laws of nature, whatever we really kind of want to call them, exist as a perspective of what things are, how things are, the way things are. That's a perspective. Perception is how it relates to you as an individual. Because knowing that flowers, for example, the perspective is flowers have scent, flowers smell beautiful. This is a common understood and known perspective. The perception of what it smells like, how sweet it smells, how spicy that's all interpretive. That's all relative to individual perception. Does that when we start to understand that we really get to see these different flows of influence in our world, knowing that again that shared plane of existence is always going to be there, but our perception isn't necessarily the whole of the perspective. And knowing that opinion is so powerful within its presence for you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a truth to somebody else. It can just be knowledge. Knowledge is just as powerful, it's just as important, and we need all of that anchored in with, I like to call it, the triple A method with the CV format: awareness, authenticity, and action. CV formatted with compassion and vulnerability. So I use this terminology because these are kind of the formats of how I approach things, how I approach my teachings, how I approach life, how I approach my interactions, how I approach my own growth. Be aware, be always open to just be aware and not think that the way that I'm doing it in this moment is the only way that it can possibly be done, and there isn't anything else at play because I'm in a shared reality. So being aware of that is step one. Authenticity is step two. Knowing that that awareness is only enhanced by me being as authentically present and the most possible me that I can be in that given moment. That all opens up for action to really take that step of manifesting in my world, knowing that these are the things that I need to keep me in this highest state of alignment. And that's what I call on the universe for, because this is who I am. This is who I've come into alignment as. And this is what I call on to stay in that alignment with you, universe. Awareness, authenticity, action. And the accountability it can be interplayed in there as well too. I definitely action and accountability I count as almost the same, with under the same umbrella, right? Because you can't take action without accountability. There has to be a sense of true sovereignty of self to be able to take that motivational action and be present with the universe. You have to be accountable for yourself, knowing that your decisions are going to have the ripple effects. And this is where we format it all with compassion and vulnerability. Compassion for the universe and the intertwining of that shared experience, that shared reality we have with everyone else, knowing we're all just expressions of the same source of creation. And we're here to help reflect these other pieces and these other parts of ourselves that we're just not seeing, we're not acknowledging at that given time. And being vulnerable enough to truly accept, to truly let the universe know who we are and be willing to receive that right back as that ripple effect, as that echo call back from the universe. Ooh, that's powerful. That's very, very powerful. A comment says they blow my mind with their willingness to learn. And we have another one that says heart is the doorway to our authenticity, I find. So our heart holds the key to authenticity. Yes, in very many aspects that is so true. Um, our heart is the center of us as beings, as humans. We are heart-centered beings. And that authenticity, I absolutely will link to both the heart and the higher heart, where knowing that an authentic presence has an empathy and a love for everything in the world around it, but it also has an honoring and a respect of self, and has that self-love that is balanced with that compassion so that it doesn't ever take over as a wounded ego or an oppressive state. It simply is acknowledging all that it is to enhance its presence as an element in the alchemy of the whole, adding as much as it possibly can to the whole. It's a very, very powerful presence. Thank you for that comment. Well, that's just about it for this show this week. Well, that was a quick hour. Thank you everybody, and I'm looking forward to continuing this so much. There's going to be so much for us to talk about, so much depths to dive into, and all I can say is welcome to the Wolf's Den. Thank you for coming and joining me, and keep coming to Howl. Howl at that moon with me every Friday. It's a full moon. We get to howl together at a full moon. Oh, thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next week.